Now this week, KwaZulu-Natal's infrastructure buckled after 4 days of constant rain. It led to multiple drownings, landslides, power outages, water shortages, and as you see there, some roads completely giving in. So far, 390 people have died. Experts have been weighing in. Some have said it's a result of years of underinvestment and poor maintenance. We're joined now by Professor of Structural and Fire Engineering and Head of the Fire Engineering Research Unit at Stellenbosch University, Richard Walls. Professor Walls, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. I think perhaps your own assessment of why it is that the infrastructure at such a wide scale in parts of KZN has collapsed in the way that it has. And, I think it might be slightly unfair to ask because there may be different conditions and reasons for why a certain bridge, let's say in eThekwini versus in Ugu, collapsed. But your own general assessment from what you've seen.
Very good question. I think there's a lot of things we have to firstly know and know more accurately. So we can't just jump to conclusions and blame one thing or another. And often in these sorts of situations, it's a combination of things that happen. And there are a few things we're going to need to look for as the data now comes to light. Firstly, infrastructure is designed for a certain statistical storm size. So if you're designing culverts under bridges or at roads and bridges and various things, you design for certain flow rates, certain amounts of water passing through. And now those are based upon historical data. So firstly, could climate change be influencing it? Yes, that's possible. Could the amount of rain falling have grown? Yes. We'll need to see it. Could this possibly just be an abnormally big event, a 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year event? Possibly. Are those 1 in 50 and 1 in 100 years events becoming more frequent? Well, we need to find out. We need to actually do more research on that. Then there are other factors that do have a big influence on it. Yes, infrastructure, we said, has it been maintained? We'd have to look on a case-by-case basis. Many things that can happen that can influence it. Maybe it's, as I said, something under a roadway or bridge. If it becomes blocked, the river builds up. And then rather than flowing underneath, it blocks and then it washes the section away. However, we also have to remember that our cities are growing, populations are growing, and many things have changed. So you may also have infrastructure that was designed 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago when the city was much smaller. And now, instead of having, let's say, 5,000 people, you have 20 or 50,000 people in a catchment. And so the areas are getting paved, homes, tarred areas, etc. So when a rain does fall, less goes into the ground and more runs off. So what you have is you have a much higher flood peak. And it's those flood peaks that lead to what you see on TV and around us and all the social media images. So all of these things can be influencing what's happened. So we also may need to go back to our infrastructure and say, well, what was it designed for? What were the assumptions? Back in the day when it was all fields upriver from this bridge, that maybe that was sufficient. Right now, it's just, shopping centers and homes, and then the flood peaks is far higher than we ever expected when the infrastructure was designed. So case by case, we've got to go through, but we also can't necessarily throw everyone under the bus and say it was your fault when it can be an abnormal event. You can't design for every single event for infrastructure to never fail. There always will come a time where it just becomes too expensive to design for every possible conceivable incident that occurs.
One of the conversations that is also being had in this moment, especially when we look at the residential areas and how deeply they've been affected by these floods, are questions about, the municipalities and approvals, and as far as granting people permission to build where some have built houses. Professor Walls, do you have a particular view of that? And this idea that, well, in some of the mountainous regions, on slopes that are sandy, that those are clear areas where people should have been told to steer clear from.
These sort of geotechnical soil failures, they happen. They're scary. They kill people. Very difficult to have hard and fast rules, but I do agree that we should be looking quite carefully from an approval position what has happened in these areas. Once again, without information, I can't blame people to say, it was definitely the municipality, it was definitely the developer. There should have been oversight, there should be investigations, especially with newer developments, should have been checked. Insurance often gets involved and makes sure that such things are not possible. So have we been building areas where we shouldn't? Yes, very possibly that could have happened, especially getting too close to areas, and often areas are not well stabilized. There's geotechnical engineering, all the soils, is quite a specialist field, and maybe we're lacking in that area, and maybe some engineers otherwise have made some bad decisions. So we'll find out case by case, and maybe just developers have not put the time, effort, money into appointing the skills that should have been there, and they claimed it was safe when it wasn't. So there are various parties that could be responsible. And once again, these are abnormally big events, and once again, also things that may have influences is if infrastructure did get blocked. So when you've got stormwater pipes getting blocked, areas getting flooded, then when they shouldn't have been waterlogged, and then what happens as the water goes up, it pushes, and also the soil doesn't lock together as well, so it slips more easily. So perhaps also the water infrastructure or other infrastructure has led to failures in these areas. So multiple things may have influenced the different failures that have occurred.
It seems to me that there are going to be a lot of lessons that need to be drawn on from this moment that will also have to inform what the rebuilding of this infrastructure needs to look like, especially when we take into account the warnings from those who are studying the climate about the fact that this kind of weather is going to become a lot more frequent and perhaps even a lot more disastrous and devastating on scale.
Correct. I mean, there's a lot of things we've got to look at. And also when we speak about infrastructure, what we often think about is the roads and the bridges, the pictures that you can see and visualize, but there is so much infrastructure that we don't initially see there, and it's often very expensive. I mean, it's all our power lines, our substations, the sewerage lines, the treatment works, wastewater, underground systems, telecommunications, all sorts of things. I mean, all of them will be damaged, all of them will be affected. We've got to go back and fix all of them. And we've got multiple parties, a lot of them municipal, but various other ones as well, private telecommunications infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to have to really think carefully now, how do we do this? You really do need a big picture understanding of the hydrology, drainage, runoff, and all these things in such areas. And there are, I mean, I've come from more of a structural infrastructure side, but I mean, you need to get the real specialist water hydrology people involved to start saying, well, what was this area designed for? What is it now? What can our rivers, our stormwater systems accommodate, and are they sufficient? How often is this going to happen? And do we need to make our drainage systems better? Do we need to provide alternative ways of handling the water, of keeping buildings dry, of protecting our electrical infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a lot of things that have got to be done. As I said, even wastewater. Now, where do our wastewater facilities lie? Have they been damaged? What happens when the next flood comes? Because it's not a question of if it's going to come, it will come.
If you were in a position to advise government in this moment, what would you say to them in as far as the process that needs to unfold going forward? And it concerns really how to rebuild.
There are a lot of things and steps. So firstly, I mean, obviously there's immediate disaster management needs that have to be met. So we need to quickly get the basic infrastructure up and running. And I mean, teams are already doing that, whether it's power, water, roads, electricity, get the basics and get people at least stable, the economy going, etc. And then there's going to be stages following that. And most of these are not simple and most of these are not quick. Repairing a road may take weeks or maybe months, depending on how much is damaged. But there's a lot more to it often that happens. Firstly, we've got to assess what has been damaged, then put together work packages that then engineers can go out, assess, create designs, then put it out to tender, etc., etc. So we've got to have multiple processes in place. The government red tape can have a major influence on these processes and the complexity. And the oversight of the tendering process, we need competent people, competent engineers overseeing what is done, care that money doesn't end up in the wrong companies, and we have competent people appointed to do it. And that's just repairing. And then beyond that, once then, firstly, then the sort of smaller damage and the larger damage, and things are progressively repaired over the coming months, and this is going to take many months, and it wouldn't surprise me with budget constraints and various other things if a year from now there are still projects ongoing. We've got to have a look at big picture. Is our big picture citywide infrastructure capable of handling this? What is it capable of handling? And what happens in terms of planning, coordinating our disaster management and all the other systems together, working with businesses, working with everything else. So there's not a magic quick fix, and it's also unfair to put all the blame on one party when there are multiple parties involved. And we do have to have enough information to say what happened, why, was this an abnormally big event? Could this have been expected? And now how do we move forward from there? And then make sure that there are technically competent people with oversight in place to put high-level projects in place, and then start rolling those out to upgrade rivers, all the sort of bulk infrastructure that requires it, and make it more resilient. It's not a quick fix. It's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of time.
Plenty of work lies ahead, certainly by the sounds of it. Professor Richard Walls is with Stellenbosch University. Thanks for your time tonight, Professor Walls.